Watch the firelight play across their faces. One by one, the group leans in as the storyteller's voice drops low, the woods around them falling silent, broken only by the crackle of burning branches. There's a chill in the air, but it isn't just the night. For centuries, people have gathered like this, hearts racing, sharing stories that echo through generations. Some tales are so outlandish you swear they're made up. But what if they're not all fiction? What if some of these old legends hide a warning? Tonight, we're diving into those campfire stories that refuse to stay pretend. Which ones are just spooky tales, and which might reveal something much darker? You can almost hear the leaves crunching underfoot before you see anything. The woods here grow thick, branches crowding out the stars, mist hugging the mossy ground so close that every shadow seems to have its own life. Folks around the nearby town have whispered about this place forever. They say a shadow lives out here, never fully seen, always just at the corner of your eye. It's not the kind of story parents tell to keep kids from wandering. It's the kind you hear at sleepovers, voices hushed, because even admitting you believe just a little bit is enough to raise goosebumps. But here's how the legend goes. Years ago, on nights when fog hugs the trees and dusk falls too quickly, travelers would feel eyes following them from the undergrowth. Not animal eyes, not glowing yellow dots, but a deep, pressing feeling, like being watched from every direction at once. Sometimes, folks claimed they'd spot a human-shaped shadow moving without sound, slipping behind trunks or disappearing when someone dared to shine a flashlight that way. And everyone knew, if you ran, you'd hear footsteps pounding right behind you. But if you stopped and looked, there'd be nothing but the sound of your own ragged breathing. The local librarian says she remembers people talking about the Watcher since the 1940s. She says there was always a name for him, or it, but it changed every decade. The gray one, the drift, even the rusher. Kids dared each other to touch the old tree stump deep inside the trail, as if that meant you owned the legend. But on this one night, everything took a turn for the sinister. No one expected the legend to step out of the campfire and into real life. A young man named Andrew, a local used to these trails, decided to go hiking alone just before sunset with the plan to photograph fog rolling through the trees. Andrew was quiet but careful. Friends say he'd hiked here every fall for years, making it out just as night really hit full. That October afternoon, though, he texted a friend as he headed in, joking about getting the Watcher on film. They laughed about how silly it was. Just stories, right? But then the sun started slipping away, and the mist grew thick. Pine needles made that carpeted swish beneath his boots. He sent another text, heard something weird, probably a deer lol. Except after that, nothing. No more texts. No photos uploaded. Time ticked on, and when Andrew still hadn't come back by morning, his friends and family got worried quick. Search parties went out, combing paths, yelling his name, calling in dogs. At first, they said he may have just gotten turned around, maybe even spent the night camped out somewhere. But they had no luck. Some volunteers said the woods felt different, heavy. One woman told local news, "It's like the trees were closing in. We couldn't shake that feeling of being followed." A couple of searchers reported, later on, that they'd heard strange footsteps too, just as the old stories warned. After 3 days, they found Andrew's backpack, placed neatly, almost as if someone had set it down for him to retrieve. Inside, his camera and phone, both out of battery. They checked for footprints. There were none that led away. Some said it was a trick of the weather, that mist and wind covered all traces. Police suggested he'd wandered off the trails and gotten lost for good. But whispers in town said otherwise. People compared notes on the old tales, the shadow that hunted at dusk, the figure nobody ever really saw. The detailed, careful way that Andrew's stuff was set down, the silence in his last messages, it lined up too closely with the stories to just dismiss. Fear took hold in the community. Kids wouldn't hike anymore. Grown men who'd scoffed at the Watcher started locking doors and refusing to talk about what happened. For the first time in years, Friday night bonfires stopped. If you asked locals, you'd get nervous looks. And sometimes a quiet, "We just don't go in the woods after dark now." Not all the fear was spoken. Some felt it deep in their stomachs. A lurch whenever someone's dog refused to step on a certain path. And then, as if feeding off the renewed anxiety, new stories bubbled up. Hikers claimed they heard extra footsteps where there was nobody. One adventurer even insisted she saw a mottled shadow slide behind a tree, just as she flashed her headlamp. Even skeptics couldn't help but notice that when the clouds and mist crawled low, there's a kind of silence out there now, deeper than regular quiet. A hush that presses in, making your skin tingle. But to really feel how thick the fear's gotten, you just need to step into the local diner, the one right by the edge of those woods. Over chipped mugs of coffee, people lean in close, voices soft. Mrs. Halverson, who's lived here nearly 80 years, will shake her head and say, "It's just not right in those woods." My pa used to tell me never to whistle after dark. Paul, the deputy, catches your eye across the room and shrugs. "Strangest thing, we had 3 hikers last month turn around halfway, said they felt watched the whole way. And these are grown men, regulars. Some folks talk about the search, how the dogs, usually eager, balked at going near the marshier part of the path. Never seen Daisy like that," one volunteer said, patting his trembling hound. "She just dug her heels in, started whimpering. Made my skin crawl." And every year, as the season changes, you'll see fresh flowers or little tokens, pins, ribbons, even tiny flashlights left at the trailhead. It's like the town can't help but reach out, hoping to keep the woods appeased. Local school kids made a mural last spring, swirling gray shapes under moonlit trees. Their teacher, Mrs. Kim, said, "Maybe if we paint it, it can't hurt us." Even the mayor gave a statement, trying to calm nerves. There's nothing in the woods except history and our own imaginations. But you could see the flicker in his eyes as he said it. Was it just coincidence? Was there something the old stories captured, a warning, wrapped up in legend, about real dangers that come with wandering too far alone in wild places? Or did the legend itself give the woods their power? The local historian likes to say, the woods have always felt haunted. The Watcher's just a name for that chill that keeps us cautious. But what's really haunting are the parallels, the fog, the vanishing without a trace, the weird sense of being stalked. People started digging out family journals, reading old letters that mentioned a shadow from decades before. Campers began to tell new versions of the Watcher story, weaving Andrew's disappearance right in, his photo taped to flyers, now forever part of the myth. Some even say that telling his story out loud keeps the woods quiet for another night. Folklore and fear, legend and loss, they twisted together in this little corner of the world, making the Watcher's shadow stretch longer than ever before. So when the fire burns low and someone shivers, it's not just the chill, it's the eerie idea that sometimes stories really do step out of the darkness and into real life. And yet, in nearby towns, old legends have returned with even stranger twists. That brings us to another campfire story, the hitchhiker who never truly arrives. But can a legend really hitch a ride? If you've ever found yourself driving down a lonely road at night, windshield blurred by fog, static on the radio, you've probably told yourself a little story to pass the time. Maybe you glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see another car, or something else. The idea of picking up a stranger at the side of the road used to seem harmless, an act of kindness. But all over the world, the folklore of the vanishing hitchhiker has taken root and grown dark. Stories about the vanishing hitchhiker go back way longer than most people realize. Some versions date back to the 19th century. The basic details: a driver sees someone, usually a young woman, standing by the road, often in distress, sometimes soaked from rain or shivering in the cold. They pull over, offer her a ride, and she climbs in, never quite meeting their eyes, sometimes smelling faintly of earth or lake water. She gives vague directions, or sometimes just remains silent, hugging herself. But after a few miles, as the driver turns to ask if she's okay or tries to make conversation, she's gone. No sound of a door, no settling in the seat, just empty air. Sometimes, her presence leaves a strange dampness or a long strand of hair on the seat. Cities, towns, even small villages have their own hitchhiker story, adapted for their particular bridges, highways, and landmarks. In Chicago, she's known as Resurrection Mary, haunting a stretch near a cemetery. In the UK, it's more often a soldier or a weary traveler in an old army coat. If you gather people around a campfire or diner table long enough, you'll always find someone who swears their cousin's friend knew a real person who picked up such a ghostly passenger. Over time, these stories merged with cautionary tales, a warning about strangers, about roads that seem too quiet, or about dangers lying just out of sight. Then, there's the story from just a few years ago, a modern sighting in the small town of Ledge Hill. On a rainy autumn night, Mark Fielder was making the drive home from his bakery job, tired after a long shift. The roads were slick, swirling fog hugging the pavement. "I almost didn't see her," Mark said in a taped interview. He described the moment. There was this figure at the edge of the road, not quite waving, but kind of turning her head toward my headlights. She looked lost. I thought maybe she'd had car trouble. Mark slowed, rolled down his window. The young woman he saw was shivering in a tattered white coat, dark hair clinging to her face. She didn't say much, he said, just nodded and climbed in quietly. I asked if she needed help, if she was hurt. She shook her head, but she seemed scared of something, kept looking behind us. Mark described driving in stiff silence as the windshield wipers thumped. He switched the heater on, glancing her way, trying to make her comfortable. He couldn't help but notice the car fill with a faint, cold smell, like freshly turned soil after rain. At one point, he said, I looked over and could see fog actually seeping from her clothes. It didn't make sense. She gave a quick, breathy answer. Her house was just ahead, down a particular turnoff. But when Mark glanced over a moment later, she was gone. Gone. 1 second, she was there, and then nothing but the empty, damp passenger seat, the door still locked from the inside. Mark's story didn't stay secret. He called the local police, worried he'd lost someone in distress, only for deputies to comb the area and find nothing. No footprints, no sign of anyone, no houses down that abandoned road. When news spread, others chimed in online and at local bars. One person posted, "My uncle picked up a girl on Highway 8 who vanished just the same way. A cold patch on the seat left behind." Someone else recalled a friend who swore his dad gave a ride to the same chilling figure down near the old bridge, describing the exact same smell, the exact same sense of unease. What makes these reports more chilling is how closely they match the old folklore, detail for detail. The damp seat, the vanished passenger, even the lost, almost pleading appearance of the hitchhiker. Local journalist Anne Reed decided to dig deeper. She visited the area at night with a recorder, wanting to document the sights and sounds for herself. There's something about the way the fog presses down on those roads. It's like being underwater, she said. Even standing by the shoulder, you feel eyes on you, or hear footsteps where there's nobody. It's hard to separate nerves from reality. Eyewitnesses, including Mark, insist what they saw wasn't just a trick of tired senses or city legends. They recall small, jarring details, the chill in the air that remained when the passenger left, the way headlights seemed to bend around her form, the lingering fear that lasted hours after they reached safety. One woman even spent the next week having nightmares about picking up riders who never spoke, always silent, always staring. "I keep wondering if it was a warning," she admitted, "or maybe just something left unfinished out there." Digging further, local police reports reveal that over the previous decade, there were at least 4 other calls about a woman vanishing from moving vehicles on that stretch of road. Each call happened during rainy weather, often at dusk, and all described the same unsettling silence and the chill that wouldn't leave the car. Officers would search, sometimes bringing in dogs, but never once did they find a single shoe print or item dropped in the grass. Veteran officer Ken Roston shared, "Honestly, it started as a joke on the station. But after the third time, you start to wonder what's out there. Some of my guys refuse to pull solo night shifts along that route. Psychologists who've studied these experiences offer lots of possible explanations. Sometimes, they say, exhaustion or bad weather creates hallucinations. The brain fills in gaps to make sense of shadows and movement, especially in stressful situations where the mind is already on alert. But these scientific reasons don't quite explain the details so many people recall. The precise dampness, the overwhelming fear, the sense of sadness that follows, lingering long after the event. Some say these legends are only echoes of tragedy, memories burned into a stretch of road by loss, grief, or guilt. But others believe there's more. For decades, ghost hunters and folklorists have collected hundreds of similar accounts, finding details that match across continents. When those stories surface, they spread like wildfire. Suddenly, every late drive becomes a test of courage, every foggy shoulder a place where reality might fray. Years later, Mark says he still doesn't drive that road at night. It's not just the fear, he says. It's what it leaves behind. You start to feel like every shadow could be another story waiting to happen. And after that night, the small town changed. Taxi drivers began to trade stories, warning each other about certain pickup spots. People started leaving bouquets by the highway's edge, a silent tribute, just in case. The legend had found new roots, growing stronger, curling its way into everyday life. Word even spread through local high schools, where students dared each other to explore Ledge Hill after dark, armed with nothing but flashlights and trembling bravado. Some told of seeing figures flit across their beams, vanishing before they could focus. Even the bravest admitted to quickening their pace, the whisper of footsteps always seeming one stride behind. But the mystery stayed. Was it just folklore hitching a ride on imagination? Or had something stepped out of that old tale to claim a place in the real world? Mark's story isn't the only one where the line between imagination and reality gets blurred. Next up, the legend of a lake that screams, and campers who found out, too late, that not every tale stays quiet after midnight. The world changes once the sun slips behind the hills, especially by the water. Lakes at night have a way of swallowing sound and thought alike. Around here, old folks still talk about the legend of the Screaming Lake, a patch of water so deep and dark that even fish won't swim near the middle. They say the legend started a century back, with tales of desperate cries echoing over the fog. Supposedly, someone drowned decades ago, and her spirit's been searching for help ever since. Back in the 1960s, a local paper ran a story on the legend, interviewing boaters who swore they'd seen ripples on calm nights, as if unseen hands reached from below. Margie Cobb, who ran the town library for years, used to point out a faded clipping. "Don't be fooled," she'd say. "Everyone's got a Screaming Lake story. You listen long enough, you'll have one too." Every year, some brave soul either brought back a new tale or a scared expression that told you all you needed to know. It's a rite of passage, sure, but also a warning. Some places carry echoes too strong to ignore. Locals remember the first warnings. Never camp too close to the shore. Never swim across after sunset. In every version, someone brags about their bravery and dares a friend to stay out until the moon is full. But few make it through the night without hearing something strange. A high, far-off scream, rising and falling like nothing made by a person or an animal. As the years rolled by, the Screaming Lake became a rite of passage. Groups of friends would sneak out with tents and flashlights, determined to stay up, to prove their courage. Most nights, nothing much happened beyond some nervous laughter and a few odd splashes in the dark. Still, the legend stuck, as stubborn as the fog that always seems to crawl over the water at dusk. One recent August, a group of 5 campers, 2 brothers, their cousin, and a pair of close friends, set up their tents only yards from the lake's edge. They swapped stories around a flickering lantern, daring each other to outdo the last. Someone brought up the legend. and another scoffed. "It's just air trapped under the water," he joked. When midnight rolled around, the moon was only a smudge above the horizon, smeared by low clouds and thick mist curling along the ground. That's when they heard it. First, it was easy to mistake for a loon or an animal, but this sound rose higher, sharp and trembling, a wailing that seemed both close and very, very far away. The group froze. The nearest flashlight jerked upward, skittering blue and white light across the swirling fog. Someone whispered, "Did you hear that?" No one wanted to answer. Each second dragged on as the scream got louder, stretching out into a horrible, breathless shriek that echoed across the water. None of the campers had heard anything like it. One of the brothers, Jason, described the moment later. You could feel it, in your teeth almost. Not just in your ears. The sound just tore through the mist, like it was split open. His cousin, Maddie, remembered shaking so hard she struggled to keep her flashlight pointed straight. It made my chest hurt, like something was squeezing my heart. I couldn't tell if it was a real scream or not. I couldn't breathe. Flashlights jittered in nervous hands, beams flicking over reeds and hollow trunks. Nobody moved, as if the air itself was too thick to breathe. For a long minute, they listened, half hoping it would stop, half terrified it would continue. And then, as quickly as it started, the screaming faded, swallowed up by the night. Only the gentle lapping of waves against the muddy shore remained. But the fear didn't fade with the sound. The group huddled even closer, whispering explanations. Maybe it was a bobcat, a coyote, a trick carried off the hills, yet nobody could quite believe what they'd heard was made by anything natural. Jason checked his phone to record something, anything, but his hands shook too much to hold it steady. Maddie kept repeating, "It's got to be a prank, right? It's got to be." Sleep was impossible. Two of them spent the sunrise pacing the bank, unable to shake the feeling of being watched, the echo of the scream vibrating in their ears. When dawn broke, they inspected the shore for prints or signs of animals, but found nothing except churned mud and scraps of fog still drifting over the water. The group packed up in silence. They didn't even want to look each other in the eye. Fear made them ashamed, and the memory did not settle quietly. Over the next week, word spread fast. Kids at school picked apart every detail. Was the scream a human cry or an animal? Did anyone really see a face in the mist? Teenagers dared each other to sleep closer to the lake next time. The town's old-timers didn't laugh. "That lake's always had a voice," one woman said, her hands trembling as she stirred her tea. "You listen close. You hear grief." Another added, "Or maybe you just hear what you most fear." The local sheriff was even asked to look into it. He found a group of jumpy campers and no solid evidence, though he admitted under his breath, "That lake gives me the creeps, too." The legend grew, intertwined with the campers' story. In the weeks that followed, others started coming forward. A fisherman named Bert, a big, tough guy with sunburned arms and a voice like gravel, claimed he'd heard the crying while hauling in nets after dusk. "It's like someone yelling for help, but it keeps going and going. Gets under your skin," Bert said at the bait shop. A mother out walking her dog told neighbors she heard the scream from across the water, and her dog started howling, pulling at the leash and refusing to go any closer. Because of these reports, people changed their routines. Local fishermen started clearing out before sunset, and families planned picnics further up the hill, away from the shore. New rules appeared overnight. Don't stay after dark. Don't challenge what you can't explain. Older kids who used to joke about lake ghosts now avoided the trails after sunset. The change wasn't just about fear, it was about respect. Folks started to feel like the lake, if nothing else, deserved some space. The aftermath was more than just fear. The group who heard the screaming struggled with nightmares for weeks. Jason left his camping gear in the garage and wouldn't go near the lake again. Maddie stopped walking the dog after sunset, too afraid of what else she might hear. One of their friends, Josh, tried joking about it at lunch, but his laughter didn't ring true. He jumped at every loud sound for days. But the story was out now, reshaped by first-hand terror instead of old wives' tales. It It was a scare the whole town shared. Did the campers hear the restless spirit of the drowned girl? Or only their own nerves singing in the dark? Was it just the power of suggestion? The legend itself creating what wasn't really there? Or was the scream a warning to keep a respectful distance from a place carrying so much sorrow? The lake held its secrets, just as the mist muffled footsteps along the shore. The only thing everyone agreed on was that sometimes legends wait just long enough for someone new to listen. Of course, not every horror comes from the water. In the deep woods, late at night, some stories come knocking. Literally. So, what happens when a legend steps right up to your door? No campfire story chills the bones quite like the tale of the midnight visitor. Picture this. A small log cabin sits alone in the thickest part of the woods. Tall pines closing in all around, their branches whispering secrets when the wind picks up. The air is always cool and sharp, carrying the sweet scent of pine needles and old wood smoke. Out here, far from town, the darkness settles heavy, broken only by the yellow glow of lantern light filtering through small windows. Inside, you'd hear the soft crackle from an old lantern and the low murmur of voices competing with the strange hush outside. Sometimes someone tries to brave a tune on a harmonica, but the music just seems to get swallowed up in all that emptiness. Even the shadows press in against the glass, blinking back at you whenever lightning bugs skitter past. The legend has haunted campers for years. It always starts the same. The group inside, maybe telling stories or playing cards, trying to ignore how wide the world is outside those thin walls. Right around midnight, just as conversation fades, there comes a knock. 3 times. Slow and hollow. It's always 3. Whoever's brave enough to check finds the porch empty. Some versions say the knocks grow louder each time you ignore them. Others claim opening the door means something worse. Glimpsing a pale figure, eyes bright despite the dark, vanishing before you can speak. The wise ones, the old-timers, say you should never open the door after midnight if you hear those knocks. Let what's outside stay outside. Every year, there are whispers about who was the first to hear them. Some say it was old Joe, a caretaker who lived there long ago. The story goes that one stormy night, he answered the midnight knock and was never seen again. Others claim it was just a trick of the wind, but nobody wants to be the one to put that to the test. Last summer, that story nearly became real for a group of young counselors at Cedar Creek Camp. The cabins there are old, creaky wood floors, chipped blue paint, each one circled by thick brush. All week, the staff swapped scary stories with the kids. The midnight visitor, always a favorite. Most just laughed it off. But the last night of camp, a few counselors stayed behind after lights out, cleaning up and packing gear for the next day. It was past midnight when the stories started flowing freely, each one scarier than the last. Maggie, the one with the loudest laugh, pretended to puff up her chest and said, "Simon, if there's really a ghost out there, let's hear it." She reached over and rapped her knuckles on the table 3 slow, mocking times. Knock. 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 Laughter filled the room, but even that couldn't quite warm up the chilly air pressing in through the cracks. As the lantern flickered and someone dared another to sleep outside, the group heard a sound. A branch tapping the window, maybe, or the creak of old boards settling. Nobody thought much of it. Until, clear and sharp, came the sound. 3 knocks at the cabin door. Knock. 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 Not frantic, not casual, measured, precise. The room went absolutely still. One of the counselors whispered, "That's a good prank, guys. Come on." But everyone inside was accounted for. Slowly, the whispers turned to nervous laughter as nobody stood up to check. A second round of knocks followed, louder this time, making the lantern tremble and splash odd shadows on the wall. The group huddled closer, their earlier bravado failing. Emily, the oldest, said her stomach dropped through the floor. It felt like being watched, she later recalled. Like whatever was out there wanted to come in, but not quite yet. In that moment, the air seemed to thicken. Maggie clutched her notepad so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Even the confident ones were silent, every eye reflecting the trembling light as they searched for some logical answer. Someone whispered, "It could just be raccoons, right? Or maybe one of the younger campers trying to scare us." Their voices sounded small, as if hoping the cabin itself would reassure them. Finally, after several long, heart-pounding minutes, the silence pulsing in their ears, one counselor, Max, mustered his courage and crept to the door. He pressed his ear to the rough wood. Nothing but the wind and the rustle of pine needles outside. Hesitation won out, and he stepped back into the warm circle of lantern light. Then, the third round of knocks, louder still, insistent, as if whoever or whatever was out there grew impatient. Some swear the knocks were so strong that dust tumbled from the rafters and the floorboards vibrated beneath their feet. They didn't open the door. They just waited, frozen, breaths held, eyes darting from shadow to shadow, for the sounds to fade. When they finally dared to peek outside, flashlight beams slicing into the forest, there was only the empty path leading into thick darkness. No footprints in the dew, no creatures, no sign of a prankster. Only the wind, the whispering pines, and their thumping hearts. The next morning, gray light crept over the hills, but nobody felt much like talking about the night before. You could see it on their faces, the way they kept glancing at the cabin door, how they jumped at every sudden noise. Emily described the air as feeling electric, like before a summer storm. And Max? He admitted much later, "I swear I could feel someone breathing on the other side of that door. Not animal breath, something cold. It's not easy to shake off even now." Sleep was impossible. The counselors waited out the morning, barely speaking, haunted by what they'd heard. Did they catch a trickster? Was it an animal? Or had the legend decided to visit, just that once, to remind them not to forget? Emily said the knocks echoed in her ears days later. Max admitted he avoided that cabin the rest of the summer. The camp director tried to explain it away. Old pipes, trees clattering in the wind. But the counselors knew what they'd heard. 3 distinct knocks, in the legend's exact rhythm, impossible to brush off. The story spread quick. Some campers refused to sleep near the cabin after dark. Parents called, half joking about moving their kids to another session. Every new group of staff added a few nervous glances toward the door at midnight, waiting for the now famous knocks. Even weeks later, hikers on the nearby trail would ask, "Is that the cabin from the story?" Sometimes, around the campfire, a younger counselor would get quiet, saying, "I think I heard it last night, but maybe I was dreaming." The dare to sleep inside became a badge of courage. But that chill stayed with every storyteller, reminding everyone not to get too comfortable, no matter how many times you hear it wasn't real. The legend, it turned out, was stronger than fear. The details shifted, the number of knocks, the description of the visitor, but 2 things remained the same. It always happened at midnight, and nobody wanted to open the door. That summer, the midnight visitor stopped being just a story. It became part of camp tradition. A warning, a dare, and, for those counselors, a chill that would linger every time wind rattled a window or a stick snapped outside. You could say it's just the brain playing tricks in the dark, but fear, once it has a story, is hard to shake. The legend walks with you out into those woods, following close behind, just waiting for night to fall and the clock to strike 12. But is every knock just a trick of the wind or something older, watching and waiting? Maybe it doesn't matter, because those knocks blur the line between story and real fear, reminding everyone that some legends aren't so easily left outside. And if you ever find yourself out at Cedar Creek, bundled up tight inside a creaky old cabin, listening to the pines whisper across the roof, you might just wonder, when midnight comes and the knocks begin, would you be brave enough to open the door? Or would you let the legend live on? Stick around, because our next story might just leave you thinking twice about what's out there in the dark. So here we are, sitting around the glow of our digital campfire, piecing together these stories: the shadow in the woods, the vanishing hitchhiker, the echoing scream across the water, and the midnight knocks at a lonely cabin door. There's something about these legends that just sticks. They're more than spooky campfire tales. They're warnings, history, and shared memories all tangled up. And, sometimes, they refuse to stay stuck in the past. Think about how these stories work. It's not just about scaring people. Folklore starts as a way to explain the unknown. Before science explained howling winds or rustling bushes, people told stories of watchers in the forest, spirits riding the back roads, mournful cries sliding across lakes, and visitors coming to call far after bedtime. The fear is real, but so is the comfort. When you name what scares you, it suddenly feels a little less big. But legends stick around not because they're always true, but because they're useful. They warn us to stay alert after dark, to take care of our friends, to stick together, and to treat wild places with respect. Every generation adds its own twist: new roads, a changed cabin, a different name for the thing in the woods, but the root of the fear stays the same. We want rules for a dangerous world, even if those rules come dressed as bedtime stories. Then, sometimes, reality creeps in. It's those moments when people see a shadow where there shouldn't be one, or hear a cry they can't explain, or wake to mysterious knocks that seem to echo from another age. When that happens, legends don't just explain fear, they multiply it. Stories like Andrew's disappearance, Mark's impossible passenger, the campers rattled by a scream, and the counselors woken at midnight, they give those old tales new life and new teeth. Suddenly, what was once a warning turns into a headline, a police report, or a memory that sticks around for years after. Families lose sleep. Towns change habits. New rules get made. Don't walk alone at dusk. Avoid the lake at night. Never answer unexpected knocks. And that brings up something deeper. Why do these stories have so much power over us, even in a world full of facts? Psychologists say our brains are built for stories. We crave patterns and explanations, even if they come in the form of a ghost or a shadow. When something unexplainable happens, someone goes missing, a voice cries out, or a stranger disappears in the passenger seat, our minds fill in the gaps with the oldest, most familiar shapes we know. Legends rise from our need to make the unthinkable feel a little less random. But reality doesn't always behave. When the unexplainable happens, people start to look at life, and at each other, a little differently. Maybe you lock your windows tighter, or you glance twice at the dark shapes lurking near the tree line. A place becomes haunted, not because of a curse, but because a story once landed there and never left. Sometimes, a community unites in fear, comfort, or reflection, using folklore as a way to heal or even laugh about what they can't control. There's a reason why, even now, urban legends keep popping up in news stories and on social media. They travel faster than ever, growing and changing shape each time someone retells them. You hear about disappearances, strange sightings, messages scratched into the dirt under your window, and suddenly, the world feels one step closer to all those stories you hoped weren't true. It gets even stranger when science or police can't quite explain away everything, leaving just enough space for legend to survive. It's easier to shrug it off as a tale, but deep down, it gnaws at us. Still, these stories serve as more than just warnings. They're mirrors, showing us what we fear most, and reminding us that sometimes, danger wears an ordinary face. But there's one last question that these stories always leave behind. What if there's still one tale out there, waiting to step out of the shadows? What else, out on a dark road or beyond the reach of a lantern, hasn't been explained? That's the thing about legends. They don't really end. They just wait for the next person to listen, to wonder, and to ask, what's really lurking out there after the fire has faded and the last story is told?